As I've shared with you in the past, my mother was of Northern Italian heritage. And when the weather would start to get chilly and maybe cold and flu season was moving in, there was a type of broth that she would make that was very soothing, whether you were completely well or maybe getting the sniffles. And it was called, I wrote it down here so I wouldn't forget it. I'm going to tell it to you in Italian and then I'll translate it for you. It was brodo, it was called brodo di gallina vecchia. And basically it means the broth of an old hen, or otherwise old hen broth. Now, what I want to share with you is don't worry if you don't have an old hen pecking around in the backyard. This can be made with a fryer. Those are the smaller chickens which you normally see sold at the grocery store. Or it can be made with a roaster, a roasting chicken. And you may even get lucky at your grocery store and find a stewing hen. And that's what an old hen is, a stewing hen. And if your grocery store carries stewing hens, it's most likely going to be in the frozen section where they'll have like rock Cornish hens and then maybe capons. As you go into the holiday season, you may also see in there duck and goose and so on and so forth, a variety of poultry. But every once in a while you might actually see a stewing hen there. And if not, ask your butcher if he can start to carry stewing hens, because these are some of the best hens for making a broth like this. That is not just good when you're feeling maybe a little sniffling coming on, but this is a broth that if you drink on a regular basis will give you such a beautiful collagen boost tonic. I'm telling you, you don't need to buy those collagen powders. They're processed. I don't care if they say low temp processed, the cold temp processed, but they are still processed and they're expensive. So stop buying those collagen powders. Find yourself, maybe the best is if you can find the stewing hen, then the roasting hen, and last but not least, the fryer, because I'm going to show you how to do this so you really maximize the collagen. And I'm sure just like the way bone broth has become so popular over the years, and it's very easy to find bones now, if we are all at the butcher and asking for stewing hens, we're going to see stewing hens become more popular again as they were when I was young in the grocery store. And if all you can find is a roaster, just go to the very edge of the poultry section and I'm positive you're going to see small packages of chicken feet, or as they're often called, chicken paws. And you can throw in a few of those. But ask your butcher for the stewing hen, and I have a feeling that he'll get them in for you. If not, don't worry, and you have ordered different cuts of meat, poultry, whatever the case may be, online, and it arrives to you frozen. I have a great resource here in Texas that does ship nationwide and will give you a discount, and they do carry stewing hens, and they're right literally in Texas speak down the street from us, maybe about an hour and a half, but in Texas speak that's down the street. And it's called Shirttail Creek Farms, or Farm, and I'll have the link in the description below, and they'll get you all set up. The nice thing is stewing hens are very inexpensive compared to regular chickens. Now, these are all pasture raised, beautiful, gorgeous, organic pasture raised, and these stewing hens are raised on pasture, so you're really getting good quality broth when you use a stewing hen that has been raised on pasture. So ask your butcher, check with Shirttail Creek Farm, or even in your own area. I'm confident there are farms in your area that are selling stewing hens, because what are stewing hens? Let's take a minute to just address that. A stewing hen is a hen that at one time was a younger hen and was laying eggs, but now that hen is an older hen. That's why it's called old hen broth. The hen has aged to the point where it's not as good an egg layer as it once was. And so at this point, they become stewing hens, ready to make a beautiful broth out of. Plus, what is great about them is the meat on a stewing hen, because the chicken is older when it's butchered, is very richly flavored, much better than the meat on any fryer, the chicken meat on any fryer on the young hens. The meat on a stewing hen is going to be a little darker and richer in flavor and richer in nutrients. So there's a lot of reasons for trying to get your hands on a stewing hen. Alrighty, well, let's get started and talk about this. Hi, sweet friends. If we're meeting for the first time, I'm Mary from marysnest.com and author of the Modern Pioneer Cookbook and the Modern Pioneer Pantry, and I'd like to welcome you to my kitchen. So today I'm going to walk you through, with pictures, the recipe for how to make an old hen broth. Then the recipe, all the information you're going to need will be on a corresponding blog post over on my website, marysnest.com. And I'll have that link in the description below. But I have a bonus for you, because in that recipe, I'm also going to share with you how to make pastina. And that's what my mother would make using the old hen broth. And that's where you put in some little tiny pastas. Children love this. I loved this when I was a little kid. Sometimes they would look like alphabets. Sometimes she'd use stellina, the one that looks like little stars. Sometimes ditalini, which just looks like kind of like a little bead or something. You could actually string them and make a necklace. I think we used to do things like that with the dry pasta. But best of all, why this is so wonderful, and it's a wonderful dish if you are under the weather and you're healing and you just can't handle a lot of food, or it's also a wonderful dish for children because it gets good nutrition into them with a little bit of extra protein, because you have the protein that comes naturally from the old hen broth. And then when you make pastina, you swirl in some beaten egg, and you get these, I think in Italian they call it strecchio. You'll have to correct me in the comments below, maybe write it out for me phonetically. My Italian accent is not always very good, but and you get these like streaks, in essence, of the cooked egg swirling through the soup. Very similar if you've ever had like egg drop soup at the Chinese restaurant. We love that. Pastina can be very similar to that. And so it's a wonderful food for yourself if you feel the sniffles coming on, or if you're feeding the sick, or if you're feeding children. You can never go wrong having some old hen broth in your freezer or your fridge and then turning it into a pastina. But today we're just going to talk about how to make the old hen broth, how to remove all the meat from the bone and have that ready. You can even just make a simple chicken soup with it, or just use the chicken in another way. Now, generally I make this in like an oval Dutch oven that I have, because this is not like making a big batch of a bone broth. You're making something smaller, and I find that making this in a Dutch oven that has that oval shape is nice, because I can fit the chicken in, and then I can put the vegetables around it that you'll see we're going to add, and that works very well for me. But if what you have is a round stock pot, that's going to work great too. You don't have to worry. Even if you have a round Dutch oven, that'll work too. This is very flexible, so I don't want you to worry that, oh, I don't have the right pot or something. A stock pot, a Dutch oven, any of this is going to work to make this old hen broth. So I've got the written recipe here and on my iPad. I always like to have it already printed out and ready for me, just in case I don't, this is not always charged or something, but it is nice because on the iPad I can enlarge things. I wanted to mention before I went over the ingredients, because I briefly touched on it earlier, but about buying these today, boy, these collagen powders, they're just everywhere. And they are processed, really. No matter what the company says, that it had to go through some sort of process to be dried and prepared for sale. And what always bothers me a little bit about these collagen powders is that they always look white. You know, why are they white? How are they making them? Why don't they have like a little beige tinge or a little brownish tinge to them? You know, maybe I'm missing something, but that just to me looks very processed. Secondly, something you need to keep in mind is that when you are just extracting the collagen, say, from however they make it, maybe they take a lot of cartilage and melt it down or something, I really don't know. But something you need to keep in mind is that when you just extract the collagen, dry it, and I'm assuming, do they cook it first? Is it in the gelatin form and then dried? You know, which it should be for your body to assimilate it better. These are all very interesting questions to me, but I don't even want, no matter what I would learn about them, I wouldn't want to take collagen powders. And the reason is, when you take a broth, whether it's a broth, a stock, a bone broth, and I have a video where I explain to you what the difference is between each of those, there are so many other nutrients that work in conjunction with the collagen and in conjunction with our bodies to absorb and make the best use in our bodies of all of those nutrients, the entire complex of them. So you've got the collagen, which really, when you make a broth, the collagen is released from the bones and the connective tissue, cartilage that connects the meat to the bone, and that sort of melts into the warm water as the broth or bone broth simmers. And then that collagen, as it's being simmered, being cooked, it becomes what we call gelatin. And when you refrigerate a well-made broth or bone broth, it will be gelatinous in your refrigerator. And then when you go to warm it up, it becomes liquid again. But the gelatin that is in this broth is incredibly soothing to our digestive tract. And a soothed digestive tract is a healthy digestive tract. And when we have a healthy digestive tract, we can better absorb the nutrients from all of the foods we eat. And when we eat this broth, not only are we nourishing, and in essence, the gelatin moisturizes, like it does our skin, it moisturizes our digestive system. And something that's well moisturized is plump and healthy, and so on and so forth. But not only are you getting that gelatin, the cooked collagen, you're getting all of the other nutrients that are in that broth. What are you getting? You're getting calcium, magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, all of these, and then the real micronutrients. Those are sort of larger minerals, and then there are vitamins and the nutrients and the micronutrients. It's so complex, and we want all of that because all of it works, if I'm using the word correctly, synergistically in our body. We need a little bit of everything. And there's no reason to be taking these collagen powders and then taking all of these vitamins that we purchase that are, again, these single ingredient vitamins. And sometimes are we taking too much? You know, because they often, vitamins today, my gosh, the amount that you read in the vitamin is often very high. Do we need that much? Or are we, as many people will say, just urinating our money? You know, that may be the case. Yet when we take our vitamins and minerals and our gelatin in its natural state, in the way it's been prepared from real food, just like what our ancestors did, and we need to talk about that, we receive those little bits of nutrients in small doses that our body can absorb and use to build healthy muscle, healthy connective tissue, healthy skin, healthy eyes, healthy hair, healthy fingernails, a healthy body, because we're taking it as a whole food, not as something that's just been extracted and processed. And we really need to take some time to talk about this, because our ancestors, the people that we are, we're Homo sapiens, and they emerged, on Earth a little over 300,000 years ago. And so what does that mean? They were able, through all of these generations, to learn how to properly prepare food that would keep them strong and healthy, allow them to resist disease best they could, so that the species would continue to perpetuate. It allowed them to conceive children, to raise healthy children, and again, keep the species perpetuating over all these hundreds of thousands of years. And through this journey, through their journey, they would pass down the nutritional wisdom from one generation to the next. This is how we prepared our food. This is, what we needed to do so that it agreed with us. And that they didn't know all this stuff that we talk about today about, the microbes and the probiotics and the prebiotics and the postbiotics. But they knew what agreed with them. They knew what they could digest. They knew what made them feel well. And they would pass this down. And it wasn't until maybe around the 1600s that people started drifting away from our ancestral food wisdom, our ancestral cooking wisdom, because all of that was starting to be perceived as peasant food. And in the 1600s, and then into the little by little, this is small, you're still just maybe dealing with royalty, nobility, dynasties, this type of thing. But then little by little creeps into the 1700s and then the 1800s, and you have the famous chef Auguste Escoffier, who decided to start collecting all of this information of how people were cooking for royalty and nobility, because now you had fine restaurants, like in France specifically with Auguste Escoffier, fine restaurants appearing, and people wanted food that looked very finely prepared. No longer were you eating the meat on the bone, which is very important to do, like our ancestors did. They were taking the meat off the bone, and they were having nice little cubes of meat, like in beef bourguignon, and so on and so forth. And yes, it looked lovely, and they were able to charge high prices for this, and that's what people wanted when they went to a fancy restaurant. They didn't want peasant food. They didn't want the food that might have been cooked by their mothers or grandmothers, as they were gaining in wealth and sophistication, whatever the case may be. They wanted to eat the way the royalty ate. And often when you look throughout history, the people in the royalty were often the people who were sicker than the peasants, who were eating more rustically prepared food, but properly prepared. I mentioned meat on the bone, and why is that important? And that's what we're going to talk about today with making this old hen broth. We've gotten away from eating meat on the bone. We've gotten away from cooking meat on the bone. There's two really popular things: ground beef and boneless, skinless chicken breasts. I'm telling you, this is so unfortunate that this trend has perpetuated itself, because when you cook meat on the bone, whether it's red meat, whether it's a chicken like we're going to talk about today, when it's cooked on the bones release what? Collagen into the meat, which when cooked becomes gelatin. And now the meat is moister. The meat has been infused with the gelatin. Any way that you've cooked this meat in some sort of liquid is very rich in the gelatin. And often that's how these meats were served. Meat on the bone would often, maybe the broth would precede eating the actual meat on the bone, or sometimes they would be served together. I have recipes where I share with you. I have one, it's funny, called Cook Like a French Peasant, where I show you how to make an actual beef bourguignon the way, they weren't calling it that, but the way our ancestors would have made it. Our human ancestors, regardless of whether I'm not of French descent, but and then once this meat was cooked on the bone and you had the proper nutrients infused into the meat and you ate that meat, it was what? Easier to digest, and the nutrients that you were absorbing from that meat were the full profile, the full complex of all of the nutrients that our body needed in those small doses that you will receive on a daily basis, that your body is absorbing and that your body is holding on to, and that you're not eliminating, that you're not paying a lot of money for all these different supplements and then just eliminating them. Your body knows how to absorb what comes from real food and how to use what comes from real food. So that's why I stress this a lot. This is why I talk a lot. And I know some of you are like, oh, God bless you, Mare. You're always talking about this. But the wisdom that we can learn from our ancestors is simply invaluable. And, sometimes people will say, oh, Mary, you're a food blogger. I never thought of myself as a food blogger because, when they're talking about my website, because to me, food bloggers today are people who they invent all these different types of recipes, and they've been so tweaked and massaged from what were the way maybe that recipe at one time was originally prepared by our ancestors, properly prepared for proper nutrient absorption. Now they're so different, and sometimes they're just things that are invented, out of the blue that have no ancestral reference. And that's not what I do, that's not what I share. I like to share ancestral recipes and show you how to prepare these properly the way our ancestors did. But the nice thing is, it's a little easier for us than it was for our ancestors because we live in modern day and we have modern kitchens, we have modern appliances. We can prepare these things, we can stay traditional, and we can use these ancestral recipes, but we're not like, over the open fire. We have a lot of nice kitchen accoutrements, I guess you could say, that can help us still prepare them properly, but easier. And that's why I often say we're modern pioneers in the kitchen. Because we have the pioneer spirit, and even back farther than that, the ancestral spirit, but we live in a modern day, and that does make it a little easier when you have electricity and clean running water to prepare these recipes. So, okay, enough said about that. I know I got on my soapbox, but it's very important to me so that people understand why we're doing this and why we want to search out a good stewing hen and why we want to make old hen broth. Now, I have so many recipes for you for how to make bone broth, how to make other types of broth, how to make stock, and I will definitely link to that in the description below. I have detailed curated playlists on all of this. But the reason I wanted to share this old hen broth with you is if you do get your hands on a stewing hen, and you can do this, as I said, with any chicken, but it's going to be the most delicious and, to a certain extent, the most nutritious in terms of the collagen boost if you get the stewing hen. And I wanted to share this with you because this was something that my mother always made. We lived in a little bit more of a country environment where there were farms around us, and my mother was able to buy stewing hens on a regular relative basis from a nearby farm. Where she would also get eggs and various other things like that. But this is very easy to make, and I think people like doing this one because it's a little easier than a bone broth. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to go through the ingredients with you first, and then I'll walk you through the steps, and I've got lots of pictures and all to share with you to overlay. As when I was making this, I took a lot of pictures for you. So you're going to start with your stewing hen, and a stewing hen may weigh anywhere from 3 to 5 pounds. And I like to keep mine whole, and you can also cut it up. It's literally going to fall apart. It's going to be falling off the bone tender. If you want, you can cut it up. I really like to just put the whole hen in. And then what I like to do is, okay, first, well, you're going to need I put here 3 quarts cold water, but really, you'll see when I show you the pictures, just enough water to kind of just barely cover, and the hen is going to kind of float, and so are the veggies. So this is not an exact science, so don't get stressed about it. I also used some carrots. I had 2 carrots cut into large chunks. If you want, you can peel them because you can serve those. They're going to be very soft, but you can serve those with the chicken that you remove from the bone. But a lot of this is for flavor and nutrients. I put in 2 celery stalks, again, cut into large chunks. I did peel my carrots. If you peel your carrots, save the shavings because those are wonderful for using when you make other bone broths or a vegetable broth or whatnot. But I was going to be serving these, and I liked how they look nice and bright orange. And then I had an onion in there. I cut it up. I think I quartered it. I did leave the skin on. I believe I left the skin on. You'll be able to tell me as I'm overlaying the picture. And generally, I like to leave the skin on when I'm of the onion. It's same nutrients as the onion. And if it's a yellow onion, it adds additional nice coloring to the broth. Put in some bay leaves, some peppercorns, and I put in a little sea salt. But what I want to do is I'm just going over, and I'll tell you in a minute why the salt. I'm just kind of going over the ingredients. So you will have the blog post available to you also while we're talking about this. So you can print out the recipe, or you can have the recipe online in front of you while we're talking about this. But what I wanted to mention was I also, generally, if you've seen my videos, I don't put salt into my bone broth when I'm making it because I like it to be very versatile for whatever I want to use it for. But when I make this old hen broth, I am specifically going to use this right away to make a chicken soup or to make a pastina. And so I season the broth as I'm making it. Now, okay, I gave you those general ingredients, but this is what I like to do because I feel this brings the best flavor. If you've ever made just chicken broth, say you had a fryer and you put it in the water raw and you covered it, maybe added some vegetables, whatever, it's often like extremely pale and not always super flavorful. Now, that may work for whatever particular recipe you're going to use that for. But what I have found that works much better when you're making this particular broth, this old hen broth, is I like to put in, sometimes I'll put like a little ghee, which is just clarified butter. Clarified butter is where you melt the butter down and then the milk solids drop to the bottom. You strain off the butter. You no longer have the milk solids in this in essence butter oil, and it has a higher smoke point. You can cook with it at a higher temperature. With ghee, you just leave the milk solids on the bottom a little longer, let them brown up. It gives kind of a nice nutty flavor to the clarified butters. That's the only difference. And I like ghee. I like that little bit of nutty flavor. So I will usually put a little ghee. This is just so that I can kind of you'll see what we're going to do with the chicken, so I can kind of get it started without it sticking. So then into that, I'll sprinkle some salt. I'll sprinkle some black pepper, And then I'll usually put in some red pepper flakes as well. My husband is a good Texan. He likes to have the broth be a little spicy. So that's sort of my trilogy, so to speak. I like to put a little salt, a little black pepper, and some red pepper flakes. But really, whatever you want to put is up to you. If you want to add in some dried herbs, if you want to go salt-free, you can. If you don't like red pepper flakes, leave them out. You know, this is very, very flexible. My mother would often put some dried oregano, and that's very good as you go into cold and flu season, because oregano is, and I was just talking to my sweet friend Michelle, I think a lot of you know her over from Chocolate Box Cottage. She's got the YouTube channel and a wonderful Facebook page, Chocolate Box Cottage. And it was funny because I was sharing with her, I always hear it like how turmeric is so anti-inflammatory and can really help with aches and pains and all of that. But it's interesting for me because I'm just not a fan of the taste in you know, most of my cooked dishes. You know, I like it if I go to the Indian restaurant. I've given our son Benjamin turmeric milk, you know, when he's been under the weather. You know, I have funny stories about that where I show you how I make my turmeric milk powder. But just as like for broth and regular cooking, it's not something that I'm a huge fan of. But the good news is there are a lot of herbs and spices that have very similar properties. And often, this is something that I just love learning about, and I find it so interesting, is that often looking to how and where your ancestors ate and where they came from can often tell you a lot about what foods might agree with you the most and help you the most with good health. And I'm of Northern Italian ancestry on my mother's side and Irish ancestry on my father's side. And it's funny, I find I really lean to those foods. And when I say Northern Italy, my mother's family came from very far northern Italy, about a mile or so from the Swiss border. And so very, in many ways, very alpine. And I'm getting close to 70. My mother lived to be close to 100, and she was enjoying dairy right up until the time she was called home to her eternal home. And I can enjoy dairy, no problems. And often, you know, depending on one's genetic makeup or as one ages, sometimes they say, you know, you lose certain abilities to digest certain things. But given my genetics that I received from my mother, I must have a very strong ability to digest dairy because I have no problem with it. It agrees with me. And I like oats, I like lamb, I like salmon, you know, very Irish things. And so I think it's important that if it's possible to study where your ancestors came from and what they ate, you know, and what agreed with them, and so on and so forth. So my mom used a lot of oregano, and oregano is very high in anti-inflammatory, antiviral, antibacterial, antimicrobial properties. It is a beautiful herb to use if you want to have all of those properties in the food that you're making. Because as you know and you learn, many culinary herbs also have medicinal properties to them. I have a video where I talk about, I think it's my top 15 favorite, and then I think I did a follow-up with my top 5 favorite that I like to try to grow when I can in my kitchen garden. And oregano is one of my favorites. I absolutely love it. And so I'm so happy to know that it has all these wonderful properties. And my mother would put this for flavoring in her old hen broth. And there we were enjoying that broth with the essential oils, in essence, that had been released, or the properties, the healing properties, were released from the oregano. So put whatever you like into this pot as you're preparing it. Then once you get everything sizzling, I like to take the hen and then I put it breast side down into my, as I said, I use this sort of oval-shaped Dutch oven. And I let it just sizzle there. I'll put it in and I'll move it around a little just to make sure it doesn't stick. But I've got the ghee in there and, you know, some of the salt, the pepper, and the red pepper flakes. Move it around a little bit. And I'll just let that brown for about 5 minutes. Now, something I do want to mention, and I leave this up to you. I know different people have different feelings about working with a raw chicken. And if you're not comfortable touching the raw chicken, you can always use those disposable plastic gloves. But what can really help this brown nicely is if once you unwrap your chicken, before you put it into the Dutch oven, try to press down on it, in essence, kind of cracking maybe the breastbone. You're just going to try to flatten it a little. This is not required, but if you can do this, it'll help more of the top part of the chicken brown. And that browning is adding to the flavor of your broth. So about 5 minutes, it'll take on a nice golden color. Then you're going to flip it over. I usually use like a tongs or a wooden spoon, you know, and I just flip it over and then I let it brown on the underside for about another 5 minutes. Now at this point, you can deglaze the pan, and how you want to deglaze the pan is really up to you. I like to use a little white vermouth. That's a fortified wine. My husband and I don't drink, and so it's not like we would have a bottle of wine that would be open and I could take a cup of it to deglaze the pan. If we had a bottle of wine and it was in the pantry and it had been open, if you are a wine drinker, you know that if a month later you may go check on that wine and it's turned to vinegar. But we'll talk about vinegar in a minute. But I really like to use some sort of fortified wines that have been fortified and turned into, you know, like aperitifs, digestives, you know, before dinner drinks, after dinner drinks, these type of things. And they usually come with a screw top and they can stay in your pantry for a very long time. And so that works very well for me. But I know a lot of people don't like to use alcohol in cooking. So when you deglaze your pan, you can go ahead and use water, but what I do recommend is that you add some sort of acid, not a lot, but enough that will help, will acidulate the water. You're acidulating the water, because that helps extract the collagen from the bones and from the connective tissue. So I'm deglazing with maybe a cup of white vermouth. You can deglaze with a cup of water, to which maybe you've added a tablespoon or two of apple cider vinegar. It doesn't need to be raw. I just recommend apple cider vinegar because the flavor is a little more mild. Apple cider vinegar can affect the flavor if you went overboard, can affect the flavor of any broth or bone broth. So you want to go easy. You could also add some lemon juice. You could add a little orange juice, just something to help acidulate that water. Once that's happened, if there are any brown bits that have like maybe accumulated on the bottom of the pan, you can just kind of move your hen around and maybe use a little wooden spoon. It's not crucial because it'll all become loosened as the broth simmers. Then at this point, you can go ahead and add in water, or you can go ahead and add in your vegetables. I sometimes do it different ways. Sometimes I'll go ahead and add in my vegetables, then add in the water. Sometimes I'll add in the water because as I've deglazed the pan, the cup of vermouth that I used, or if you're using a cup of water that you've acidulated, when it hits that hot pan, it may evaporate very quickly. So often at that point, I'll go ahead, I'll add in the water, and at this point, it's not quite, I'm not covering my hen. I may only come up maybe halfway because I'm going to be putting in vegetables that are going to raise the water line. So I'm a little careful about how much water I add. And then I'll go ahead, I'll add in those carrots, the celery. Oh, I forgot one thing I wanted to mention to you. If you add, I've got to back up, I'm getting ahead of myself. When you deglaze the pan and then you go ahead and add in your water, something you can do, say you've not added the vegetables, nothing yet, you deglaze the pan and you add in the water, bring it up to a boil, but then immediately turn it down to a simmer. This may cause some foam to rise, and those are impurities. This is not 100% required, because when you're just doing this with one hen, it's really not a big deal, but you may have some impurities rise to the surface, and then you can skim that off. As I said, it's kind of optional when you are doing this with just one hen, but that is an option. Alternatively, you can go ahead, put your water in, put your vegetables in, and just hold off on, if you're going to add additional peppercorns or bay leaves, just hold off on those for a minute, bring it up to a boil, and then immediately turn it down to a simmer. And if any foam arises to the top, impurities, you can just skim that off. Then the only reason I said to hold off on the peppercorns, if you decide to add in some, is because, now mind you, I put pepper in the bottom when I was simmering it, but sometimes I'll add extra peppercorns. But I will wait, even when I'm doing a bone broth, like a very formal bone broth, until I skim off some of those impurities that rise to the top. Otherwise, I'm getting all the peppercorns too. So if you want at that point, then go ahead, add in your peppercorns, add in your bay leaf, and let everything simmer on again, every stovetop is a little different. Mine can run a little hot, so I'll usually keep it on a low setting, and you're looking for a very gentle simmer. Bloop, bloop. Sometimes with old hen broth, it's a hardy bird. You can do this a little more than you would like your traditional bone broth, where you're just going bloop, bloop, but you're also simmering it a lot longer. This you can just have a very, a low simmer where you're seeing some bubbles and bloop, 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 bloop. Nothing scientific there. And then go ahead and cover it. Now, with an old hen broth, what's really nice about this, you're only going to have to simmer this for about 3 to 4 hours maximum. You're going to check this at 3 hours, and you're going to find that most likely the hen is really started to soften significantly. And if you go to try to lift it out, it may start to fall apart. The meat is going to be falling off the bones. It's going to be extremely tender. The broth is going to look a very lovely, rich yellow. That's the nice thing if you are able to get a stewing hen that has been pasture raised. The fat, when the stewing hen is still raw, is very yellow. And you want that because that is loaded with nutrients, that yellow fat. It has wonderful omega-3s like you get from salmon, or you get from meat from the animals, from the fat of the animals that have been, like cows, that have been raised on pasture. The same is true with chickens. So the more yellow, almost to the point of it being orange, like when you crack the eggs of hens that have been raised on pasture, on grass, and the yolks sometimes are so yellow they're almost orange. So now your broth is going to be a beautiful, luscious, golden color, and the broth is just, everything's going to smell wonderful. So once it's just literally, the hen is literally falling apart, now what you're going to do is you're going to transfer all your solids. You're going to transfer the hen, and as I said, it's going to be falling off the bone. It's probably going to just fall into a lot of pieces. You're going to remove the hen along with all the veggies, and you're going to go ahead and put that into a bowl. and then you're going to have your broth. Now you have options on this. When it comes to straining your old hen broth, you can just put a fine mesh strainer over a bowl, or I use a very large measuring cup sometimes, or depending on how much broth I think I've got, or a stock pot, and I will just strain that broth using that mesh strainer, and I'll strain that right into the bowl, and then I'll transfer it to a jar, and I will refrigerate it. Once it's refrigerated, a little bit of whatever fat has rendered during the simmering process will rise to the top, make like a little bit of a fat cap, that's what I call it. And then you can remove that if you want. That schmaltz, don't throw it out. It's wonderful for cooking with, sauteing with. It's very nutritious, and it's wonderful for sauteing vegetables. It's also a very important ingredient if you ever make chopped chicken livers, which I have a recipe for. I love that. I love chopped chicken livers. So in any event, the other option is you can get very fancy and you can line your mesh strainer with a flour sack towel or some cheesecloth. This is going to strain every little bit and bob that might otherwise get through the mesh strainer out of your broth, which is really going to have it very clear. Then you can take that broth and put it in the fat separator. If you've seen my bone broth videos, you know I love that fat separator. And then you can put your broth into the fat separator and then transfer the broth minus the fat into your refrigerator, or I often will put it in like 1 to 2 cup containers that I'll then freeze. And so I've always got that handy. Whether I'm making a soup, a stew, a gravy, whatever the case may be, I've got that in my freezer. So those are some different options. And if you watch any of my bone broth videos, you'll see me going through this whole process. And I wanted to share this with you. I don't have this in my more traditional format where I'm actually at my kitchen island and doing this. I was actually just making this for my family, and I said, I want to share this with my sweet friends. I want to show them what I'm just making in my kitchen and share with them why I make this and why I like to use a stewing hen to make this. So this is a little more informal in terms of the pictures I show you, and if I don't always 100% of the time say exactly what I'm showing you in the picture, is because I was just making this at the time and taking pictures because I said, oh, I want to save this. I want to show them what I was doing and then talk about it here with you. So now you have this wonderful old hen broth that is very rich in nutrients, a wonderful collagen boost in the form of gelatin, a wonderful collagen boost. It's a tonic. And you can just sip a cup of this every day, or you can use it as a base to make your chicken soup with all of the chicken that you're going to remove from the bones of the stewing hen. So you're going to have all this beautiful, rich, nutrient-dense chicken and this wonderful collagen boost. I like to think of it as a tonic. I may have said that. It's a collagen boost tonic. You have this wonderful, rich chicken broth that's not like your average chicken broth. This is a lot more nutrient dense because we use the stewing hen. So now, what can you do with this? As I said, you can sip this as a broth. You can use this to make your chicken soup with the chicken that you've removed from the hen, or you can go ahead and use this to make a pastina, which I talked about in the beginning. And I will have that recipe. That's all going to be included. I have it right here for you. That's all going to be included in the instructions for how to make this particular old hen broth, and then how to use the old hen broth to make the pastina. Now, if you like this type of making this type of food, be sure to click on this video over here where I have a whole host of broths for you. I have the bone broths, I've got vegetable broths, and I've got some wonderful, very clever things that are like a golden broth that is almost like a chicken broth, but perfect for you, for those of you who lean a little more vegetarian. So whatever you need, it's going to be in this curated playlist. And I look forward to seeing you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.